a shattered window, a hidden box of letters, and a rancher staring at the truth he was never supposed to find. What secret tied them all together? Flames burst through the barn roof as snow whipped across the yard. Wade Collins stumbled from the smoke, one arm wrapped around Savannah while sparks rained onto the frozen ground. A sheriff knelt in the ashes and lifted a metal oil can. No one spoke. The wind carried only the crackle of burning timber and the uneasy feeling that this fire had started long before that night. Then Savannah noticed something in Wade's eyes that made her heart stop. "Before we begin, tell us, what would you have done if you were standing there that night?" The stagecoach rolled into Cedar Bluff just after sunrise. Cold wind swept down from the Bighorn foothills and carried dust across the road beside the station. The horses snorted steam into the air. A few ranch hands stood near the loading platform drinking coffee from tin cups. A freight wagon rattled past the general store. Savannah Reed stepped down carefully, one gloved hand holding the rail. After 4 days of travel from Missouri, her legs felt stiff. Her dark blue dress had survived the journey better than most. A small brown suitcase sat beside her boots. Inside it were 2 dresses, a sewing kit, a family Bible, and every hope she still owned. She looked across the station yard. A man was waiting. Raymond Pike. She recognized him from the photograph he had mailed months earlier. For a moment, relief washed through her. He had come. Then she saw his face. Not nervous, not excited, ashamed. The feeling settled into her stomach before he spoke. "Miss Reed," he said. The greeting sounded formal. Wrong. Savannah tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. "Mr. Pike." Several people nearby slowed their movements. Not enough to stare openly, just enough to listen. Raymond cleared his throat. "I don't believe this arrangement should continue." The words seemed to vanish into the wind. Savannah blinked. "I'm sorry?" He glanced toward the street instead of looking at her. "I made a mistake." Silence spread across the platform. A ranch hand stopped lifting a crate. Someone near the station door muttered under his breath. Savannah stood perfectly still. 4 days on a stagecoach. Months of letters. Every dollar she had saved. All of it suddenly felt foolish. Raymond shifted his weight. "I can't marry you." The suitcase slipped from her hand and struck the wooden platform with a dull thud. No one moved. Not him. Not the townspeople. The cold seemed sharper now. Savannah swallowed hard. She would not beg. She would not make a scene. But her eyes burned despite her effort. Raymond removed his hat. "I truly am sorry." The apology sounded rehearsed. Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation. No offer of help. No place to stay. Savannah watched him disappear into the morning crowd. A strange ringing filled her ears. She became aware of people looking. Not cruelly, just curiously. The way people watched a storm forming over distant hills. She lowered her eyes. For the first time since leaving Missouri, she had no idea what came next. Then boots sounded against the platform boards. Slow, steady. Someone stopped beside her fallen suitcase. A large hand reached down and lifted it. Savannah looked up. The man standing there was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a worn brown coat dusted with trail dirt. His hat shadowed most of his face. Most, not all. His eyes were calm, not pitying, not curious, simply calm. He set the suitcase upright. "You don't have to stand here alone." The words were quiet, yet somehow they carried farther than Raymond's rejection. Savannah stared at him. She had never seen him before. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "Wade Collins." A few people nearby exchanged glances. Apparently everyone knew the name. Everyone except her. Wade looked toward the street, then back at her. "Have you had breakfast?" The question caught her off guard. "No." "Then you should eat." She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was such an ordinary thing to say after everything that had just happened. "I don't have much money left." Wade nodded once. "That's not what I asked." For the first time that morning, the corner of Savannah's mouth threatened to move, only slightly. Wade picked up her suitcase again. "Come on." She hesitated. The sensible thing would have been to refuse. He was a stranger, but he was also the only person who had stepped forward. The only one. Savannah looked down the road where Raymond Pike had vanished. Then she looked back at Wade Collins. "All right." Together they walked away from the station. Behind them, Cedar Bluff began talking. By noon, nearly everyone in town knew the story. The mail-order bride had arrived. The groom had rejected her, and Wade Collins had taken her away. Long before sunset, the story had already grown larger than the truth. Savannah did not know that yet. She only knew she was following a quiet cowboy toward a future she had never imagined. And as the sun disappeared behind the red hills that evening, she would discover something else. Wade Collins was not taking her to Martha Doyle's boarding house. He was taking her to Collins Creek Ranch. His ranch. The home of a man who lived alone, a place miles outside town. And by morning, all of Cedar Bluff would be talking about that too. The wagon wheels rolled over frozen ruts as daylight faded behind the red hills. Savannah sat quietly beside Wade Collins, her suitcase resting between her boots. Neither of them spoke much. The wind carried the smell of sagebrush and distant wood smoke across the open land. As they crested a low rise, she finally saw it. Collins Creek Ranch. A weathered white house stood on a hill above a narrow creek. A red barn sat farther back beside a corral. Lantern light glowed from a single window. Beyond it stretched pasture land fading into dusk. Wade pulled the team to a stop. "We're here." Savannah stared at the house. "This is your ranch?" "It is." She hesitated before climbing down. "I thought you were taking me to the boarding house." Wade removed a coil of rope from the wagon. "Martha Doyle's place is full this week." He paused. "And I wasn't leaving you at the station." The answer was simple. Almost too simple. Inside, the house was clean but carried a silence that felt settled into the walls. A cast-iron stove warmed the kitchen. A pair of coffee mugs sat drying beside the sink. A calendar from 2 years earlier still hung near the pantry door. Nothing looked neglected. Nothing looked lived in either. An older man appeared from a side room. Gray beard, bent shoulders, sharp eyes. Samuel Price. He looked from Wade to Savannah without surprise, as if Wade bringing home a stranger was unusual, but not impossible. "Evening," Samuel said. "Evening," Wade answered. Samuel tipped his hat toward Savannah. "Ma'am." Savannah returned the gesture politely. Wade carried her suitcase upstairs and stopped beside a door overlooking the creek. "You can stay here." The room was small but pleasant. A quilt rested neatly across the bed. Fresh water stood in a wash basin. Someone had recently opened the window to air the room. It was the nicest room she had seen in months. "You prepared this?" she asked. "No." Samuel's voice drifted from the hallway. "I did." That earned the faintest smile from Savannah. After supper, Samuel retired early. The house grew quiet. Wade sat at the kitchen table repairing a leather bridle strap beneath a lantern. Savannah folded her hands around a cup of coffee. The flame reflected softly across the surface. "You don't have to explain what happened today," Wade said suddenly. She looked up. Most people would have asked questions. Not him. For a moment, she simply watched the lantern light moving across his face. "Thank you." Wade nodded once and returned to his work. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Later that night, Savannah stepped into the hallway. Moonlight spilled through a window near the stairs. That was when she noticed it. The last door at the end of the hall, closed, unlike every other room. As she passed, she saw dust everywhere except on the doorknob. Someone still touched it. Just not often. The next morning began before sunrise. She heard Wade leaving for the barn. A few minutes later came the distant sound of cattle and the creak of corral gates. By breakfast, she found him already working. And over the following days, she began noticing things. Wade always ate alone before anyone else sat down. No visitors ever came. The ranch books were stacked neatly in a cabinet, but several pages contained strange notes beside old debt records, land surveys, boundary disputes, water rights. The deeper she looked, the more questions appeared. Then one evening, as darkness settled outside, a rider approached the house. Savannah watched from the kitchen window. The horse stopped near the porch. A heavy-set man climbed down. Ezra Boone, the wealthiest landowner in Cedar Bluff. His arrival immediately changed the air. Wade stepped outside. The two men stood near the hitching rail. Their voices carried through the cold. "I'm making one final offer," Ezra said. "No. You haven't heard it yet." "I don't need to." Several long seconds passed. Then Ezra's voice hardened. "Your father died because he wouldn't sign those papers either." Savannah froze. Outside, Wade stood perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. For the first time, Savannah realized the trouble surrounding Collins Creek Ranch might be far older and far more dangerous than anyone in town was willing to admit. Ezra Boone eventually rode away into the darkness, leaving only hoof prints in the frozen dirt and a silence that lingered long after he was gone. Wade remained on the porch for several minutes. He did not watch the road. He watched the creek. The same creek Ezra wanted. The same creek his father had refused to surrender. Savannah stood at the kitchen window, pretending to straighten a dish towel. Neither of them spoke about what had been said. Not that night. The next morning arrived with a hard frost covering the pasture. Life at Collins Creek Ranch continued, at least on the surface. Savannah repaired a torn curtain in the front room. A week later, Wade returned from town carrying lumber across his shoulder. By evening, a narrow bookshelf stood beside the sitting room window. Neither mentioned it. But the following morning, Savannah placed her Bible and 2 borrowed books on the shelves. When Wade noticed them, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. It was the closest thing to a smile she had seen. Days slipped into weeks. Winter crept closer. The cattle needed extra feed. Fence posts had to be reinforced before the first heavy snow. Samuel worked alongside Wade despite his age, though Savannah often noticed Wade quietly taking the heavier loads whenever Samuel wasn't looking. One afternoon, she joined them near the north pasture. The wind had damaged a section of fencing along the creek. Without asking permission, she picked up a hammer and began working. "You don't have to do that," Wade said. "If I leave it to you, it'll still be broken by supper." He looked at her for a moment, then returned to his work. The sound of 3 hammers echoed across the valley. It felt strangely peaceful. That evening, Savannah found a fresh stack of firewood outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation. She knew exactly who had left it. The first snow arrived 3 days later. Only a light dusting, enough to turn the hills white, not enough to stay. That same afternoon, Wade and Savannah rode out together to bring a small group of cattle back from the southern pasture before weather worsened. Clouds gathered over the mountains. The air smelled of snow. At one point, Savannah's horse stumbled crossing a shallow wash. Before she could steady herself, Wade's hand closed around her reins. Just for a second. Long enough. "You all right?" She nodded. His hand remained there a moment longer than necessary. Then he let go. Neither mentioned it. The storm reached Cedar Bluff shortly after sunset. Wind battered the ranch house. Snow hissed against the windows. The three of them ate supper near the stove. Samuel had already gone upstairs when Savannah smelled smoke. Not from the stove. Outside. Different. Stronger. She stood abruptly. Wade was already moving. The barn. Orange light flashed beyond the kitchen window. Both of them ran. The wind had turned the barn into a torch. Flames climbed the walls and raced across the roof. Snow swirled through the firelight. The horses inside screamed and kicked against their stalls. "Wade!" Savannah pointed. One mare remained trapped near the rear stall. Without thinking, she ran toward the entrance. "Savannah!" She ignored him. The frightened horse pulled against its lead rope. Smoke filled the air. Savannah reached the stall and fumbled with the knot. Finally, it gave way. The mare bolted past her toward the open door. Then a sharp cracking sound echoed overhead. Wade appeared beside her. His hand caught her arm. "Move!" The roof beam shifted. He shoved her toward the exit. She stumbled into the snow. A second later, part of the roof collapsed. The impact threw sparks into the storm. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then she saw him. Wade emerged from the smoke, but not cleanly. His shoulder struck the doorway as he came through. He fell hard into the snow. "Wade!" She dropped beside him. His face tightened with pain. The fire reflected in his eyes. Around them, ranch hands from neighboring properties began arriving with buckets and blankets. Someone shouted for water. Someone else yelled for Sheriff Owen. Savannah barely heard any of it. She was staring at Wade, at the way he tried to sit up despite the pain, at the way he immediately looked toward her first. Not the barn, not the fire. Her. Hours later, little remained except blackened beams and smoking ruins. Snow continued falling. Sheriff Owen Carter crouched near the remains with a lantern. After several minutes, he reached into the ashes with a gloved hand. When he stood, his expression had changed. "What is it?" Wade asked. The sheriff held up a small metal can. The smell reached them even through the cold. Lamp oil. Fresh. Deliberate. Sheriff Owen looked toward the dark hills beyond the ranch, then back at Wade. This wasn't an accident. The snow kept falling. The ruined barn smoked behind them. And for the first time, everyone standing there understood something important. Somebody wanted Collins Creek Ranch gone. The snowstorm finally passed 2 days later. Sunlight returned, pale and cold across the hills, revealing the full damage left behind. Half the barn was gone. Several tools had been destroyed. One section of fencing near the corrals had collapsed beneath drifting snow. But none of that worried Savannah as much as Wade. The doctor from Cedar Bluff had wrapped his shoulder and ordered him to rest. Wade listened for exactly 1 day. On the second morning, she found him trying to put on his coat. "You aren't going anywhere." His hand froze midway through the sleeve. "I was only checking the livestock. You can check them from the window." For a moment, Wade looked as though he might argue. Then he noticed the determined expression on her face. Slowly, he sat back down. The smallest hint of surrender crossed his features. It felt like a victory. Over the following weeks, winter settled across the valley. The days shortened. The nights stretched long. Snow piled against the fences. The ranch grew quiet. Too quiet. Many evenings, Savannah sat near the stove mending shirts while Wade rested in the chair opposite her. Sometimes neither spoke for half an hour. The fire cracked softly. A coffee pot warmed near the stove. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Yet the silence felt different now. Less lonely. One night, Wade finally spoke about the closed room at the end of the hallway. The room belonged to my father. Savannah looked up from her sewing. Wade stared into the flames. He spent years fighting over that strip of land beside the creek. The same land Ezra wants? Wade nodded. He said there were papers proving ownership beyond question. What happened to them? His jaw tightened. We never found them. The fire shifted. Neither spoke for several moments. Then Wade added quietly, "After he died, the papers disappeared." The words lingered in the room long after he stopped speaking. A few days later, Savannah began cleaning an old storage shed behind the house. The building had not been properly organized in years. Dust covered everything. Broken harnesses hung from nails. Crates filled with old receipts and rusted tools lined the walls. While moving a stack of feed ledgers, she noticed something unusual. One floorboard sat slightly higher than the others. She knelt, pressed down. The board shifted. Her heart quickened. Beneath it sat a small iron box, heavy, locked. The metal carried years of dust, yet someone had hidden it carefully, very carefully. That evening she showed it to Wade and Samuel. Neither recognized it. The following morning, Savannah carried the box into town. Luke Doyle worked at the land office and occasionally helped organize property records. When he saw the box, his eyebrows lifted. "Where'd you find this?" "Under a floorboard." Luke spent nearly an hour working the rusted lock. Finally, it clicked open. Inside lay a stack of folded documents, old surveys, property maps, legal correspondence, and letters. Dozens of letters. The room fell silent. Luke unfolded the first survey, then another, then another. His expression slowly changed. "This isn't possible." Savannah leaned forward. "What is it?" Luke swallowed. "These records prove your creek land belongs to the Collins family." Her pulse quickened. "What about Ezra Boone?" Luke looked down again. He shouldn't own any portion of it. The next letter was worse. Then another, and another. Each one painted the same picture. False filings, changed boundaries, forged signatures, years of deception. Savannah sat motionless as the truth unfolded. Then came the final shock. A folded letter bearing Raymond Pike's signature. Luke read it twice, then handed it across the desk. Savannah's fingers trembled slightly as she read. Payment, instructions, travel arrangements. The words blurred together, but one name remained clear. Ezra Boone. The room seemed suddenly smaller. All this time, the station, the humiliation, the mail order arrangement. None of it had been chance. Someone had planned it. Someone had wanted her there. Wanted trouble. Wanted scandal. Wanted pressure placed on Wade Collins. Luke slowly removed his spectacles. "I think Ezra paid Raymond." Savannah stared out the office window toward the snowy street. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the box. Outside, church bells echoed faintly through Cedar Bluff. Inside, a far more dangerous truth had finally been uncovered, and somewhere beyond town, Ezra Boone still had no idea that his secret was no longer buried. For 2 days, Savannah told almost no one what she had found. The iron box remained hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her room at Collins Creek Ranch. Only Wade, Luke Doyle, and Sheriff Owen Carter knew the full contents. Snow still covered much of the valley, though the first hints of spring had begun creeping into the lower ground near the creek. Every morning Savannah checked the box, not because she doubted the evidence, because she understood what it meant. The papers could destroy one of the most powerful men in Cedar Bluff. Men like Ezra Boone rarely accepted defeat quietly. Her fears proved justified sooner than expected. 3 nights later, a loud crash echoed from outside. Samuel Price was the first to reach the front door. By the time Wade and Savannah followed him outside, a shadow had already disappeared into the darkness near the barn ruins. The old ranch hand bent down. One of the windows had been smashed. Fresh boot prints marked the snow. Someone had been searching the house. The next morning they discovered the storage room had been torn apart. Drawers emptied. Cabinets opened. Old ledgers scattered across the floor. Whoever came had been looking for something specific. The iron box. Fortunately, they had not found it. Sheriff Owen arrived before noon. His expression darkened as he examined the damage. He's getting nervous. No one asked who he meant. Everyone already knew. That same afternoon, another problem arrived. Samuel never returned from checking a fence line along the south pasture. As daylight faded, Wade saddled his horse despite his healing shoulder. Savannah rode beside him. They found Samuel nearly a mile from the ranch, shaken, bruised, his wagon overturned beside a ditch. The old man insisted he was fine, but his face said otherwise. Someone had stopped him on the road. Someone had warned him to stop helping the Collins family. The threat was clear. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Bluff, Savannah felt anger burn hotter than fear. The station, the humiliation, the lies, the fire. Now, Samuel, enough. 2 days later, she placed the iron box on a desk inside the land office. Luke Doyle carefully arranged every document, every survey, every letter, every forged filing. Sheriff Owen stood nearby. By noon, half the town had gathered. Word traveled quickly in small places. Ezra Boone arrived shortly afterward. He entered confidently. That confidence lasted less than 5 minutes. Luke presented the original property records, then the altered versions. The differences were impossible to explain away. Murmurs spread across the room. Ezra's face tightened. Then came the letters, one by one. Until finally Luke unfolded the document bearing Raymond Pike's signature. The room fell silent. Sheriff Owen read it aloud. Payment, instructions, travel arrangements. Ezra Boone's name appeared clearly. A chair scraped across the floor. Raymond Pike lowered his head. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then he finally admitted the truth. He had accepted money. The mail order arrangement had been part of Ezra's plan. The goal had never been marriage. The goal had been scandal, pressure, humiliation, anything that might force Wade Collins to sell his land. The room erupted with voices. Ezra tried to deny it. The documents denied him more effectively. By sunset, the investigation officially began. For the first time in years, the creek land belonged to the Collins family without dispute. Weeks passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the valley. Snow melted from the hillsides. Grass returned along the creek banks. One afternoon, Luke arrived at the ranch carrying another file. This one had been overlooked for decades. A trust established by Wade's father. Land holdings, investments, mineral rights. The value exceeded anything Wade had imagined. Samuel nearly dropped his coffee cup. Luke laughed. You may be one of the wealthiest ranchers in this territory. Wade looked down at the papers, then folded them closed. The next morning, he returned to repairing the house. Nothing else changed, or almost nothing. The locked room at the end of the hallway finally opened. For years, it had belonged to memory. Now it belonged to the future. Wade spent weeks repairing the floorboards and replacing the cracked window. He built shelves with his own hands. A cutting table followed. Then cabinets. One evening, Savannah stepped into the room and stopped. Sunlight from the western window stretched across polished wood. Spools of thread sat neatly arranged on new shelves. A sewing room. For her. She turned slowly. Wade stood in the doorway, suddenly looking far less confident than the day he had faced Ezra Boone. "You built this?" He nodded. "I thought you should have a place that's yours." Savannah looked away for a moment, only because her eyes had become difficult to hide. Spring arrived fully soon afterward. The cottonwood tree near the house began growing leaves again. One warm afternoon, Wade asked her to walk with him. They stopped beneath its branches. The creek moved quietly nearby. Birdsong drifted across the valley. Wade removed a small ring from his pocket. Nothing fancy. Plain silver. Honest. Like the man holding it. He didn't kneel. He didn't rehearse a speech. He simply looked at her. "The first day I took your hand, I thought I was helping you." His voice softened. "Turns out, you were saving me." For a second, neither moved. Then Savannah placed her hand in his. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Not because she needed rescuing. Because she chose him. The wedding took place beside the creek several weeks later. Martha Doyle cried openly. Luke tried pretending he wasn't emotional and failed. Samuel smiled more that day than anyone could remember. The water moved gently beside them, while Wade and Savannah exchanged vows beneath a bright Wyoming sky. No grand celebration followed. No fireworks, no spectacle. Just people who cared about them sharing food, coffee, and laughter beside the ranch. The following morning, Savannah stepped onto the porch just after sunrise. Mist floated above the creek. The valley glowed gold beneath the early light. Far beyond the fence line, Wade was already working, hammer in hand, repairing a section of fencing. He looked up. She looked back. Neither waved. Neither called out. They didn't need to. After everything that had happened, they understood something simple. They were home. And maybe that's the part of the story that stays with us the longest. Not the day Savannah was left standing at the station. Not the fire. Not the secrets hidden in old papers. But the quiet moment at the end, when two people who had spent years carrying their burdens alone finally had someone beside them. If you place yourself in Savannah's shoes for a moment, imagine arriving in a strange town with nowhere to go and no reason to trust anyone. Or imagine being Wade, spending so many years behind walls that you forget what it feels like to let another person into your life. Most of us, at one time or another, have been one of them. What makes this story meaningful isn't that life suddenly became easy. It's that they kept choosing each other through uncertainty, disappointment, fear, and hope. Sometimes love isn't found in grand speeches or perfect moments. Sometimes it's found in a hand offered when the rest of the world looks away. Sometimes healing begins the day someone quietly decides to stay. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you had been standing on that station platform, would you have taken Wade's hand? And if this journey meant something to you, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more stories waiting beyond the next trail. Stories of courage, second chances, family, and the unexpected places where people find their way back to one another. Until then, take care of yourself, and may peace find you wherever the road leads next.